1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12
My
o'clock,
guest this
rock. We're gonna
evening
rock.
is Jimmy Williams, originally from New Brighton, the original Brighton boy, as Jimmy tells me. And Jimmy has been a man of extraordinary sorts of accomplishments. One of them was being the New Zealand light welterweight amateur champion, and also later he became the New Zealand professional champion as a welterweight. So Jimmy, you've been away from New Zealand for a very long time. Where have you been?
I left New Zealand to go to Australia 26 years ago. I've been living on the Gold Coast, and 2 years ago I shifted to the Sunshine Coast.
So Jimmy, if I take it back, right back to when you were fairly young, this is really 50 plus and loving it. It's a bit of a program about those 50s and 60s and 70s times when we had such wonderful times with rock and roll and all of this sort of thing. But I believe you were aware of Max Merritt even in those early days.
Yes, we used to go to the England Street Hall on a Sunday afternoon. Max's parents hired the hall out, and Max was first starting off, and we did our rock and roll with him many years ago.
Do you remember the band still?
I remember the name Meteors, but it was a long, long time ago.
Well, isn't that just interesting? Because I don't think there'd be a person in Christchurch, a young person like we were then in those days, that didn't follow Max when he was such an early performer with rock and roll. Do you remember Trevor King?
Yes, I remember Trevor King very well.
So, Jimmy, how did you get interested in boxing? How did you start in boxing?
Well, as you know, and many people knew, I come from a big family with 10 boys, and it was more or less fight to survive. And the eldest brother, Ron, took up boxing, and we all followed from then on.
And then there was Bobby.
There was Joe, there's Ted, there's Bob,
Ted,
myself. Yeah.
Yourself, a real fighting family. Yeah. If you're tangled with the Williamses, you're tangled with them all.
We were called the Kelly Gang of New Brighton, and we had our guys down there. It was very good. Good living those days.
And tell me, did your dad train you originally?
Yes, he did train us originally until I moved away. I ran away from home and got my own trainers, and I went from there on. I did well.
So if I recall, as a baby amateur, basically going up to represent Canterbury at the New Zealand Championships in Hastings, I think.
Yes, 1958.
58, I was fighting there, and I think that you were fighting also as a light welterweight, and I think you won the title that year, the national title.
I won my title that year, but I always vividly remember your father coming up to me at the railway station and said, "Look after my boy, it's his first trip away."
And you did too, if I remember right.
We had a great time. I mean, we had a lot of trips together and a lot of fun. And good to look back on.
Yes, I can remember as a young fella then you were one tough hombre as far as I was concerned, a really tough fighter.
And we loved our fighting.
And you won the championship very well. Do you remember who you fought as the light welter that year?
In the final I fought Neville Spencer from Southland, and luckily I won a knockout in 48 seconds of the first round. So.
Well, there was no doubt about that fight. So, Jimmy, you went on, and how many fights as an amateur did you have? Can you recall that?
I think I had about 65 fights as an amateur, and I recorded I had 8 losses, so I had a good record.
That's a pretty good record. And now you were orthodox, that means you fight it with your left hand out, not with the right hand out as a southpaw does. And as a professional, why did you turn professional?
Well, actually, I was nominated to go to Vancouver.
Fight in the games?
In the Commonwealth Games.
Commonwealth Games.
And I'd run away from home, and I thought those days you couldn't turn professional for 2 years after the games, and I thought 2 years is too long, so I was turning pro then, and I did regret it. I would love to have gone to represent
So you
New
really
Zealand.
were a lily white amateur. What you wanted to be originally was a lily white amateur, and to go for the Commonwealth Games if you could. But I can understand why you did it. It's a long time to be out of the fight game when you want to really. Now they can turn straight away. I think.
Yes, well in Australia you don't have to be an amateur. You turn professional straight away.
That's right.
But as I'd like to say with the Australians. we had a lot of Australians come over to our place and stayed with us and trained with us, and I learnt a lot from them. And one of the main ones was George Barnes' brother, Don Barnes.
Well,
And he
George Barnes
very-
was a great fighter, wasn't he?
George Barnes was one of Australia's greatest welterweights ever had, and Don was no slug either. And Johnny Cooper was another one. And
Johnny Cooper, yes.
he taught me how to be the southpaws, which I got very well known for, because my older brother Bob was a southpaw, and we had no love lost in the ring.
A southpaw, would you like to tell people what a southpaw is?
The southpaw stands with his right hand forward and his right foot forward, and it's unorthodox, and a lot of orthodox boxers cannot handle them.
So an orthodox fighter would only fight a southpaw about once in every 10 or 20 fighters, whereas a
Oh, yes,
southpaw
yeah.
would fight an orthodox fighter almost every time,
Nearly every
wouldn't he?
fight,
So
yeah.
he had the advantages all the time, didn't he, in that respect?
Well, I fought the Australian lightweight champion, Graham Lightfoot, and he was a southpaw. I fought him in Oamaru. And he said to me after the fight, he says, I couldn't fathom you out at all. Why is it you could handle a southpaw? And I said, well, I sparred with one all my life, so my brother. And that helped me in my boxing.
Yes, so that would be a great advantage. So a
yeah.
southpaw to you were pretty well used to them, and you
I
knew,
was
you knew how to fight them.
Happy with them.
Yes, that's right. Well, you started to fight as a pro, you wanted to do this, and who were some of your opponents? Can you remember?
Honey Forsyth was my main one. I fought him 3 times. I fought Eric Munro. Eric Munro is a fellow who beat Jimmy Carruthers on his comeback. You know, Jimmy Carruthers out, and I fought Eric Munro in Dunedin.
Here's a funny thing. I had my New Zealand title fight as a professional lightweight against Jimmy Cassidy.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. Well, Jimmy Cassidy beat Jimmy Carruthers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just amazing. And of course you filled it in there. I should
Well,
have said that, yeah.
Yeah, and myself have fought a few people very similar, and with the Australians, and the boxing in those days is just like sport today. The Aussies hate the Kiwis and the Kiwis hate the Aussies.
We'll never lose that sort of mutual feeling of well,
Yeah.
I can't say it's admiration between us, but the competitive nature of Australia and New Zealand, whether it's boxing, whether it's
Football,
netball,
anything.
whether
Yeah.
it's rugby, whether it's league, soccer, it doesn't matter, it's still there. And it's really what makes the world go round for Kiwis and Australians, isn't
Well,
it?
even though I've been here 26 years, when New Zealand plays Australia, I'm a New Zealander.
Well, it's the same thing. I can remember being in Sydney, and I was over there for about 6 months, living there in about 1960, and I won the Golden Gloves then of New South Wales, and the New Zealand bands were coming over at the time, and of course we all went down to the Lee Gordon stage shows that they had with a big round stage, and we heartily cheered for anybody who looked like a New Zealander or sounded like a New Zealander, so we never really lost that.
Well, even today, like I play bowls now, lawn bowls, and we have a New Zealand Day versus Australia. This is in Australia, and I wear a T-shirt, and on the back of the T-shirt it's got, I barrack for 2 teams, the All Blacks and any other team that plays Australia, and I get hell for it.
I bet you, have you got accepted as an honorary Australian as yet?
Oh, yes, until something happens in New Zealand, you know.
Yes. Well, Jimmy, tell me a wee bit more about some of these fighters that you fought as a professional.
Well, even go back as an amateur, I had some tough fights with Brian Monsell. And Brian's a very good opponent. He was a very good fighter. And I look back on those fights, and they were good. Brian won 1 and I won 1, so we were level.
Pretty evenly matched.
Yeah. And as a pro, I fought a few Aussies. Tongans, one, he caught me in the solar plexus in the Auckland open air and I couldn't even see him. But luckily I survived it and beat him. But I had some tough fights as a professional, and it's a tough game and you come through it all.
It's interesting to note that a couple of weeks before you came over here, Terry O'Donnell, who was apparently living in Australia, came over here and we had a bit of a quiet evening, a couple of drinks down at one of the hotels, and Brian Monsell was there to welcome Terry at the same time as I was, and we had a good yarn and a good talk, And Brian told me that he thought you were a very good, strong fighter, really hard to beat. He said he always enjoyed the fights he had with you because it was so close and it was so hard. You were a really good competitive fighter. So it was great to get that comeback.
Yes, well, you're talking about Terry. Terry is a southpaw.
That's right.
And Martin, Brian's father, said to me one day, tell Terry what a southpaw's weakness is. And I said to Terry, all right, I'm going to counter and left hook you tonight. And we started our first sparring. Terry jumped in with a right rip, and I counter left hooked him and set him on his backside. Now Martin said to me, you told Terry how he can counter that. And I told Terry how to counter, and bang, he put me on my backside. So
now that's funny that, because when we were talking with Terry O'Donnell, and Terry O'Donnell is quite tall and for his
right.
weight, isn't he? And I think he fought mainly at about a light middle, if I remember.
Middleweight, yeah.
Now, I was a lightweight and not a big lightweight, and when I was as a professional, we sparred lots and lots of times, as you all do, to help each other out. And I can remember Martin telling me to put it on to Terry a wee bit if I could. And I caught Terry with a beautiful left rip right into the stomach, and it put Terry onto the ground, winded him. And I made the mistake of starting to laugh at this fella a lot heavier than me getting winded by only a small lightweight. And Terry got up with a bit of a wry smile on his face, and then he came and he threw it, and he hit me with a right rip right into the solar plexus. It lifted me off the ground. I came down on my heels and I couldn't fall over because I was absolutely paralysed, couldn't breathe or anything. And as I fell over onto the deck of the floor at the Hibernian Hall, I can still see Terry smiling and chuckling and say, how did you like that one? So it was rather similar to what happened with you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
No, they were good days, and you travelled together like another fellow we have mentioned, Doug Green. We had a lot of fun. And we did a lot of travelling. Went to the West Coast a few times, Dunedin, Ashburton, Timaru. I was actually at Ashburton today, but we had a lot of fun together as a team.
Now there's a good fight name for you, Dougie Green, because Dougie was a bit older than me, and we went to the same gym at Crichton Cobbers Club in the early days, and we became firm friends. And Dougie had a beautiful left hook. We were about the same weights. And we went through our different sides of our careers until one time we had to fight in the Canterbury Championships. And Dougie was relying on this because this was his last season. And I managed to beat Dougie. And it was, how can you have the two good things? The joy of winning, but beating your best friend when you really wanted him to win too. So it taught me a very early lesson that there aren't friends in the fight game.
No.
You're out there when the bell goes. The bell goes, and that's quite different, isn't it?
Exactly.
Who was the best trainer you had, do you think? Or who was the one that gave you the most as far as fighting?
Well, a little fellow called Charlie Tyndall. He was very good, but he didn't know the finer points of boxing, and I made the big mistake of my life. When I left home, I didn't agree with my father, and I thought I knew more about boxing, forgot more about boxing than he ever knew, but I didn't go to an established trainer, and that was a bad mistake. When I fought in Auckland, I fought Sue Brown. There's an American brought this boxer over to fight Tuna Scanlon, and he put a big write-up in American magazine about me. And he said how far I could go if I got that proper trainer, because I had everything to do it. But I didn't follow it up. And the sad story was I'd had a big ding with a brother, and he took me to court. And I lost that case, and they threw the book at me, and I gave boxing away.
What you said is quite true, that the difference between going all the way to the top is sometimes only a good trainer.
That's right.
And I think that I was very lucky because I had some great trainers as a young boy coming through, and Charlie Tyndall was also one of those, and Dennis Gallagher, and quite a few of them. And I went to Bob Palmer, and Bob Palmer was Ambrose Palmer's brother.
That's right.
And when I didn't get picked for the game selection, when I'd beaten most of the opponents, including Paddy Donovan, I decided to turn professional, and I went over to Australia and fought under Ambrose Palmer, who taught me one hell of a lot. And it's exactly the same thing. I have no doubt at all that you would have gone. You went a long, long way in the fight game anyway, but you could have been into the world featurings if you'd had perhaps a trainer of the ability that I had.
Yes, I regretted that. I regretted it myself, but it was a family problem, and that was it. So it's something now I look back on, and I follow the boxing game just to the extent of just what is going on, you know. And in Australia, they're very, very strong, as you know.
Yes, they certainly have this sports ethic that goes right throughout the netball, the league, the rugby, the soccer.
You've only got to see the Commonwealth Games results.
They're tremendous.
They have so much put into the Australian, it's a thing that most of them live down Canberra training, and it's full professional.
But you see,
Institute of Sport.
The ethic is there that you've got to win. This is the point about this competition is winning. It's great to take part, but the end result is the winner.
But Dion, it's not all the winner, and this is where it's been a bit in the papers here since the Commonwealth Games. Why is New Zealand accepting fourth place? New Zealand is a tremendous place for sport. The population will tell you that. They are fourth, running fourth in a medal race and all that, against countries that have got 10 times as many people as them, 20 times as many. So they're a great sporting country.
Oh, look, I'd never knock our ability, but I do say that in the schools there seems to be the ethic that just to take part is all you need to do, that it doesn't matter about winning. I'm totally against that. There has to be a winner, but you've still got to be gracious enough to lose graciously too. And there's always one better somewhere around the corner, isn't there?
Yes, I've learned this in bowls now. So.
And you're into bowls now, are you? In a
yes,
big way?
I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Yeah.
That's grand. And how are you finding the temperature over? And is it
beautiful?
Queensland way, is it?
Yes, Queensland, yep. The Sunshine Coast, and it's beautiful over there.
And when do you hope to return? You're only here on a short trip, are you?
Yeah, that's all I'll be. I've had 7 trips here now, and I come back on a reminiscence over the good old days of New Brighton, and it's fantastic.
And I bet you've met a few people from those times too.
Oh, yes. I came back here from the 50th Jubilee of Form 2 a couple of years ago.
That's wonderful.
And it was good to catch up with everybody. You know, it's fantastic.
Jimmy, I'd like to thank you for giving me this interview, and as a personal friend I say it's wonderful to see you here, even only for the few short minutes or so that I have. But I want to tell people everywhere that my experience with you were a wonderful fighter. The thing that you had above all else was courage and tenacity and the ability to refuse to accept defeat.
Thank you very much, Dion.
Thank you,
I've enjoyed
Jimmy.
this. Thank you.
See you later, alligator. So